So with the release of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, we now have 11 theatrically released Star Wars films, and now it seems like a right time to take a look back at all of them and rank them from worst to first. So, just a couple of things to mention before we jump into the ranking. First off, I will not be including the animated Clone Wars movie that was released in time for the show, just because while I do own that movie, I've seen that movie a couple times, I just don't really count it as part of the overall Star Wars movies, and also it's not really a movie that was made to be theatrically released. It's kind of more of a TV movie that's kind of a couple of different episodes merged into one, so I don't really class it as an overall movie, so it won't be on the list. And also, this is just my list. It's completely subjective, it's completely fun. Everyone's Star Wars ranking list is going to be so different from one another. So with all that out of the way and with all that in mind, let's jump into the ranking. Coming in at number 11, we have Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, this movie to me is a weird one, because when I watched it, originally when it came out, I really, really liked it. But as time has gone on, and as I've sort of matured and the movie has grown, it really feels like this film is really out of place to me. Because while it was the first attempt at Disney doing a Star Wars spin-off movie, and while I think the concept of the spin-off is really good, I actually really like the idea of them doing, that story that we kind of heard about in the opening crawl of A New Hope. I was really disappointed by this movie in regards to how they executed it, because the problem with this movie is that it seems like the writers just knew that all the characters in this movie were going to die. Like, we all knew going into this movie, every single character in this movie was going to die, no one was going to make it out of the movie, and it seemed like the writers knew that, and it seemed like the writers assumed that the audience would know that, so with that in mind, they just didn't really take any time to develop any of the characters, so they all feel incredibly hollow. So when we do get to the end of the movie and they all do die, you don't really feel anything towards it, because you've just spent 2 hours with these characters who you literally know nothing about. And while the final act, yes, it is probably one of the more spectacular final acts in Star Wars film, I do feel like it all feels a bit empty and a bit effortless when the characters are just so empty and just so hollow, and I don't really care about any of them. And while I do hope that the Cassian Andor series that we're getting on Disney Plus will develop, obviously, Cassian and K2SO a bit more than this movie did, it just feels like it's a bit too little too late for me, given the fact that this movie had so much potential and kind of fell to the wayside. While it does have some positives, like I say, the third act is pretty fun. It's a lot of really cool space stuff going on. It's one of the better space battles in the Star Wars movies, and also obviously that Darth Vader scene is absolutely fantastic. And again, I do also appreciate the kind of gritty, darker nature of this film. This film focuses on kind of a different kind of... It's very street level for a Star Wars movie, if that makes sense. I do enjoy those elements of it. Overall, I just feel like this film is lacking a sort of central core, and that is really good and likable characters, and this movie just doesn't have that. Coming in at number 10, we have The Phantom Menace. Now, The Phantom Menace is kind of a very arguable movie and point of contention for Star Wars fans. Obviously, this was the first prequel film, and this one has gone down in history as one of the worst Star Wars movies, and for a lot of people, the worst Star Wars movie. Now, this film does have some redeeming qualities. I think the characters in this movie are good. I really like Qui-Gon Jinn, of course, played by Liam Neeson, a fantastic character and a great addition to the Star Wars universe, and seeing Ewan McGregor take up the role of young Obi-Wan Kenobi is really fun, and especially because he really embodies this role and really embodies this character. I cannot wait for his Disney Plus show, because he is fantastic as Obi-Wan. And also, I actually really like Natalie Portman as Padme. I know a lot of people sort of grew to like her a bit more in the later films, but I actually quite like her in this movie as well. I think, she has quite a minimal role, but I do enjoy, her purpose here, and I do enjoy kind of setting her up for what we will later see down the road in the other two films. Also, this film does have some really awesome sequences, like the pod race is awesome and so much fun, and also, of course, we have to talk about the big final fight between Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and going up against Darth Maul. Absolutely incredible. Like, this was the first taste we got of the prequel fights. Obviously, the prequel fights are very, very choreographed, they're kind of almost dance level, but that kind of style, while yes, it's incredibly clean cut, it's so entertaining to look at. It's just fascinating to watch, and given the fact that this prequel trilogy takes place in a point in time where the Jedi and the Sith were in their full prime, it actually makes a lot of sense to kind of do these scenes in that way, and this was the first taste we got of that. And speaking of Darth Maul, we really got a good introduction to him as a character, and he quickly became a fan favourite. While this film, for its positives, it also does have its negatives. A lot of people do like to poke fun at Jake Lloyd as the young Anakin. I actually don't think he's that bad in the movie, personally. I think he's fine. He's as good as any kid actor would be at this point in time. I don't really feel like he's the reason the movie's bad. But, you know, a lot of people, yeah, it's not the greatest performance of all time. At the end of the day, what are you expecting? Jar Jar Binks, again, I don't really find him super annoying. I find him kind of innocently cute here and there. I can understand why people do find him annoying. And then also, I do feel like this movie's a bit slow paced, especially at the beginning. It does take a while to get going, and I think the main central storyline of this, you know, it depends how into the world you are of this movie. Like, if you are just a casual Star Wars fan, I think you'll find this movie super, super boring. But if you're not, and you actually enjoy kind of like the politics side of it, you might actually find it quite interesting. So The Phantom Menace, it's an interesting movie. It's a very different one for the rest of the saga, and for me, this run could really go either way depending on who you are. Coming in at number 9, we have Attack of the Clones. Now, Attack of the Clones is kind of another weird one, because the story of this is really quite strange for a Star Wars movie. This film is essentially a love story. This film really tries to build the relationship between Anakin and Padme. And while I do feel like this movie does jump the gun quite a bit, given the fact that I've always said this, I don't think The Phantom Menace should have actually happened. I don't think that movie should exist. I think the prequel trilogy should have started here, and then we should have had a Clone Wars movie, and then we should have had Revenge of the Sith. Attack of the Clones just kind of comes in, and we see this sort of relationship begin to build between Anakin and Padme, and yeah, it's not great. Hayden Christensen, although I like Hayden Christensen, I like him as Anakin, he's not the greatest actor, and in this, the way they portray Anakin is really creepy. He just stands around and stares at Padme and smiles at her in a really creepy way, and it just doesn't make the romance any more relatable, and it makes you just completely not buy it whatsoever. I was watching this movie just going, I don't buy these two, they don't work. And while I do feel like, you know, as a Star Wars fan who have just known these movies all my life, you know, I'm just familiar with that, for someone watching it for the first time, it would be difficult to get into this relationship because it just doesn't work on screen. But this movie does have its redeeming qualities. I think, again, really cool action sequences, as they always do. The final throwdown in this movie on Geonosis with all the Jedi, and we get to see characters like Mace Windu and Kit Fisto really kicking ass. And also the final fight, you know, we get to see like Yoda fight for the first time, which was amazing. And, you know, the Attack of the Clones, which this movie shouldn't have been called that, but whatever. Attack of the Clones, it's really cool. I do feel like this movie is a bit of a mixed bag. It's kind of really good in some elements, really weak in others, and it just creates a bit of a surface-level Star Wars film. Coming in at number 8, we have The Last Jedi. Now, The Last Jedi is really interesting for me, given the fact that before I rewatched all these movies this week, The Last Jedi was actually my number 3 on my ranking. I had it as my 3rd favourite Star Wars film, and now it's down near the bottom. The reason for that being is that while I think this movie has a lot of really great stuff going for it, I think Rian Johnson did a tremendous job directing it. I think the story beats that they took were really interesting and really well done. I actually quite like how they handled Luke in this movie, personally. That's not my issue with The Last Jedi. I think that all the stuff that takes place on the island with Rey and Luke is really interesting and really well handled, and I think that all the stuff that takes place in the ship and in space with Poe and Admiral Holdo and Leia, again, there's quite a lot of conflict there, which is very entertaining to watch. My problem with The Last Jedi is that half of this movie is really boring, and that is the stuff with Finn and Rose on Canto Bight. Did not care for it. I thought it was so uninteresting, so boring. There was just nothing achievable here. There's nothing that actually happens. They kind of go to meet this codebreaker played by Benicio del Toro. They get him, and then they go off and they have their own little side story, which kind of ends in a fight with Finn versus Phasma, which the fight was okay, but it's just all that build-up was just so pointless by the end of the movie, and I just came away from it just thinking, what was the point? Now, all that aside, I do think this movie has a lot of good redeeming qualities to it. I really enjoy it for the most part, and I do think it's one of the more technically well-made Star Wars movies, but I also do find half of the movie incredibly boring. If they could remove that section of the movie, it would probably be much higher on the list. Coming in at number 7, we have Solo, A Star Wars Story. Now, this movie has really gone up in my estimations. This movie was right down the bottom before the rewatch, but going into Solo, I came away from it thinking that was actually a lot of fun. When I first came out of this movie, when it came out, I actually hated it. I thought it was absolutely dreadful. Really boring, and just completely pointless as a movie. And while I do feel like this film is still pointless, we didn't need this movie. Even me, who my favourite film franchise of all time is Star Wars. My favourite film character of all time is Han Solo, and and Lando is not far behind. Me, of all people, should be excited about this movie, but I just was not. I was like, could not care less about it. And this movie does have really dumb moments. Like, this film just answers questions that did not need to be answered, such as, Han, how he got the name Han Solo. That was something I just never questioned. I just assumed his name was Han Solo. Like, this is a really, this is a space, sci-fi, ridiculous world. I just assumed his name was Han Solo. We have characters like Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Why is Han Solo such a stretch? I didn't need that answered. And how he got his gun and stuff like that. Again, I just didn't really need it. I didn't care for it. But all that stripped away, this movie does actually have a really fun little story in between it, and it actually adds a lot of depth to the Star Wars world, where it kind of delves into the criminal underworld, and I think that this movie could actually be expanded on in a really awesome Disney Plus series with Emilia Clarke's Kira, who's a really cool character, working with Darth Maul, who of course shows up at the end of the film. Really cool stuff could go on there. Also, I really like the villain, Dryden Voss. He was really cool. Alden Ehrenreich, I actually think, does a really good job as Han Solo. I really like the more work with Chewbacca they do. And I think the cast overall, it's just a fun movie. It's just a fun little movie that I really enjoyed. And as part of like a spin-off, yeah, while it is pointless, it's completely futile in regards to the overall Star Wars story, I just enjoy it for what it is. Coming in at number 6, we have Revenge of the Sith. Now, I've always loved Revenge of the Sith. This movie is just so much fun. It's quite long, but it's just non-stop action. Like, this movie from the scene 1, it's just bangs wall to wall. I think that this film, you know, it had one mission, which was to show the descent of Anakin into Darth Vader and the fall of the Jedi Order, and it does that spectacularly. I love how this film is just further and further going down the rabbit hole. It gets worse and worse and more depressing as it goes on. The movie's quite sad as well. Like, by the end of the movie, I was really quite bummed by the whole thing, especially because you have like Padme's death, which is really quite sad, and the movie culminates, of course, with Anakin and Obi-Wan in that amazing fight, probably the best fight in the series, definitely my favorite fight in the series, between Anakin and Obi-Wan. And there's so much emotion in that fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan. The acting between the two actors was fantastic. I loved all of it. And I think the locations in this movie are really interesting. Like, obviously, all the different planets make Star Wars what it is. And I think the introduction of planets like Mustafar, and we got to go to Kashyyyk for the first time, really adds some more levels to the Star Wars world. And I think that this movie, again, is purely an action movie. Like, if you love the action Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith is definitely one for you, because it's so much fun. There are so many lightsaber battles in this film, and there's so many big battles. We also get like the introduction of General Grievous in this film, who's just one of the coolest Star Wars villains of all time. There's just so much going for this movie, and yeah, it does still have its typical prequel problems, like the script's not great, the acting's not amazing from here to there, but I do think that the film overall, as a Star Wars fan, it's just so much fun, and it has so much good payoff, and has so much good moments that you can just sit back and relax and enjoy it, and also be a bit stressed at the same time. In at number 5, we have the latest, The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about this, given the fact that I've just done my review. You can check that out on the channel, and also I don't want to talk about any spoilers, of course. But I think The Rise of Skywalker was a great payoff and a great conclusion to the Skywalker saga. For me personally, I had a great time with it. While it does have issues, I also feel like there are issues that kind of persist within the entire sequel trilogy, such as character interactions and stuff like that. But overall, I think The Rise of Skywalker, I think it's getting unnecessarily hated on. I do understand why some people don't like certain elements of it, and why some people aren't gravitating towards the movie as much as others do. But for me personally, I think that The Rise of Skywalker does a really good job of wrapping up the storyline of a lot of the characters within, and I do enjoy how it really wrapped up not only the sequel trilogy, but also the entire Skywalker saga. And for me, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great ending, and I was completely satisfied. In at number 4, we have Return of the Jedi. Now, Return of the Jedi, of course, is the final film of the original trilogy, and for me, I was really, really excited to see this on the rewatch, because I did all the original trilogy back to back, all in one go on the rewatch, which I've never done before, so getting the big payoff was really fun. For me, I love the opening of this movie. I love the opening in Jabba's palace. It's dark, it's grimy, it's gloom, and I really enjoy how it kind of takes those vibes, and then they all kind of get brushed away as soon as Luke enters the scene. The sort of development of Luke throughout this trilogy is really well done, and I love how he shows up in this movie just as a Jedi Master. He's fully formed, he knows what he's doing, he busts out that green lightsaber, and he just goes to town. And I think it's a really fun payoff, given how long we've been waiting for him to kind of really become a Jedi in this trilogy. And of course, the way this movie all culminates and builds to get this big final battle against the Death Star and the Emperor and Darth Vader, it just culminates in such a fantastic final battle filled with emotion, like Revenge of the Sith, where we have this awesome battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan. In this final battle, we have a battle between Luke and Vader, father and son, which is really emotional. And you also have the Emperor on there taunting Luke from second to second. And we also get to see some really awesome Force powers. Like, this is the first time we ever see the Force lightning, which was just absolutely insane. And of course, it ends with such an emotional moment with Vader picking up the Emperor and throwing him overboard. And then that amazing scene with Luke and Vader talking for the first time properly like father and son. It really hit me emotionally. And I think that this film just has so many great moments like that, that it's just so entertaining to rewatch time and time again. My only real negative with this movie is that I'm not a huge fan of the stuff that happens on Endor. I feel like that stuff is a bit boring and just... I think the problem is that it's just nowhere near as interesting or as exciting to watch as all the stuff going on the Death Star. But that aside, it's not a bad storyline. I'm still fine with it. It's just not as exciting as everything else going on in the movie. But still, overall, as a whole package, The Return of the Jedi is great. And some people actually say this is their favourite Star Wars movie, and I completely understand why that is. But for me, this is where it falls on my list. Coming in at number 3, we have The Force Awakens. This was, of course, Episode 7, the first reboot since the prequel trilogy, and I was absolutely over the moon with how this came out. For me, The Force Awakens, I think it's the most accessible and the most rewatchable of all the Star Wars films. I feel like as a newcomer, you can come in and watch The Force Awakens, no problem, and be fine with everything that goes on. Obviously, yes, there are references and things like that, but besides all that, the main story, you'll be fine. And most of the characters that this movie focuses on are all new characters. And I think that I absolutely love how this movie just went in that direction, because while it does feel like this whole trilogy has kind of had a problem with who to actually focus on, whether it be the original characters or the new characters, I really like what this movie did with the new characters. Rey is great in this movie. Finn, this is definitely the best movie for Finn in the trilogy, especially because I do feel like Finn was a little shortchanged as the rest of the trilogy went on. In this movie, he's great. The one who's shortchanged in this one, unfortunately, is Poe, but he obviously does get more to do in 8 and 9. But I think that this overall kind of beginning of this trilogy was really solid. It's funny, like it's definitely the funniest Star Wars movie. Bringing back Han, like Han did a really good job of kind of just bringing that sense of relatability back into the franchise, and to really bring those OG fans back into the franchise by giving us that character to latch onto. And I think that the new characters as well kind of bleed off of that really well. The action is really exciting. The lightsaber fights we get in this, we get a kind of new lightsaber style introduced in this film, where the lightsabers really feel heavy in this trilogy, which I really like. They feel like they actually take a lot of effort to swing, because in the prequels they're just light as anything, they just do all this, but in the sequels they actually feel like they're heavy, like they actually feel like swords, which is like the first time Star Wars has ever really done that. So I feel like this film introduced so much, and of course it did introduce Kylo Ren, who I think is one of the best Star Wars characters ever. Not only is he my favourite thing in the sequel trilogy, but he's just one of the best Star Wars characters, period. I actually think he's the best Star Wars villain. I think he's better than Darth Vader, which I know is quite a hot take, but I personally really love Kylo Ren and Adam Driver in the role. So for me, The Force Awakens did so much right. Yes, it is a little bit of a repeat of A New Hope, but at the end of the day, all Star Wars movies are following the same formula, and if you weren't familiar with that by that point, I don't know what you're expecting with this movie, but for me personally, I think, yes, it is formulaic, but it's Star Wars, and it felt great. Now, my number 2 and number 1 can flip back and forth, but as of right now, I'm going to go with this. At number 2, we have The Empire Strikes Back. Now, of course, The Empire Strikes Back is oftenly referred to as the best Star Wars movie and one of the best movies of all time. While I agree with that statement, this is where it falls on my list as of right now. The Empire Strikes Back, for me, is just such an interesting film, because obviously this film came out as a sequel to Star Wars, and at the time people didn't really know what to expect going into this film because there was so much riding on it. The first film was such a huge success back in 1977. This film coming out in 1980, people didn't really know what kind of film they were getting into here. This film is a massive directional change from the original in the sense that it's much darker and it's a lot more at stake than what we were experiencing in the first film. The first film was obviously a very more sort of light-hearted, simple, fun movie. This film had a lot more dark themes to it. This film has some of the most iconic moments throughout not only Star Wars, but kind of cinema in general, especially with, of course, the I Am Your Father moment, which absolutely blew audiences away back in 1980. Obviously, now we're a bit more used to those kind of things, which I feel like why Empire hasn't quite aged as well as some people would like to think it has, just because I feel like it did inspire all these cliches, but at the same time, it did inspire those cliches, so at the same time, you've really got to respect the movie for that. And I think that the way the characters in this movie were developed, I think Han kind of takes a bit of a backseat in this one, but especially with like Leia and Luke in particular, the stuff with Luke and Yoda on Dagobah is so well done, and I love how it just kind of shows Luke as a character developing, because he starts off as a bratty, kind of hasty little kid, and then he kind of grows in this movie to become the Jedi that we will see in Return of the Jedi. And I think that this film overall just has so much great stuff going for it. It's so iconic, it's so fantastic, and the fight scene between Vader and Luke at the end of the movie has so much weight and heft behind it that you really feel that emotion, and I think it just really shows all the cool stuff that this movie was all building towards. And for me, The Empire Strikes Back it is arguably the best Star Wars movie, and at a different point in time, it could be my number 1, but as of right now, it's my number 2, which isn't a bad spot. And topping off my list is Star Wars, or A New Hope. For me, this movie is just pure, simple, cinematic fun, and I love every single minute of it. For me, a lot of my love for this movie really comes from, like, the opening hour, where a lot of it is just Luke and the droids hanging out on Tatooine. I don't know what it is about that, but it just really gravitates to me personally, really warms my heart. I love the exploration of Tatooine, which is a really cool planet in my opinion. I know a lot of people find it boring, but I actually think it's a really fun planet because there's a lot going on with it. There's a lot you can explore there. We got to go into Mos Eisley Spaceport, which is really interesting. And then we have the introduction of Obi-Wan, of course, old Ben, who created one of the best Star Wars characters of all time. And I think that Luke, overall, the way he grows, and with the droids like C-3PO and R2-D2, two of my favourite Star Wars characters, it's just really fun to watch overall. And I think that A New Hope, of course, it all culminates in this big final battle, going up against the Death Star, which, you know, was something the audience had never seen before. This level of CGI, this level of special effects, had never been used in screen before. So audiences around the world were absolutely blown away by what Star Wars was able to do back then, especially back in 1977. This was unprecedented, and I think that the introduction of all these different space elements, the world building that this movie does, it just creates this world that people are able to get lost in. Kids and adults alike are able just to get sucked into this world and really appreciate what it was delivering on screen, and that is why I really love A New Hope. And of course, it is the movie that kicked off my entire film franchise, my favourite film franchise of all time. So for me, Star Wars A New Hope is exactly why it is my number 1. It's just because it kicked off everything, and for me, it really started and ignited my passion in film, and I just love everything it delivered. And for me, it's a really amazing movie that I will always hold close to my heart. So there you have it, there's my ranking of all 11 theatrically released Star Wars films. If you have your own ranking, make sure you leave it in the comment section down below. Please be respectful of each other's lists, of course. No one's list is the right list. We all just have our own opinions, and let's all respect that. And let's have a great discussion in the comment section down below. And as always, guys, if you want to see more movie reviews and movie-related videos just like this one, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload from me. And I hope to see you guys again next time.